Have you ever been home alone at night and heard a noise that made your heart stop? That moment when you freeze, straining to listen, wondering if you really heard something, or if your mind is playing tricks on you. The scariest part isn't the sound itself. It's that split second when you realize you're supposed to be alone right now. But maybe you aren't. Tonight's stories aren't the usual internet tales or urban legends. These are real experiences from real people who survived terrifying encounters in what should have been the safety of their own homes. Each one will make you question whether being home alone is ever truly safe. A quick warning before we begin. These stories contain details that some viewers might find disturbing. They're not about gore or violence. They're about that creeping feeling when you realize something is very, very wrong in your own home. The kind of stories that will have you double-checking your locks tonight. Let's begin with our first story. Story 1. The Basement Visitor. The worst part about fear isn't the moment it hits you. It's the slow buildup. Those tiny warning signs your brain tries to dismiss until it's too late. That's what Sarah learned on a winter night that changed how she thinks about home security forever. Sarah's house sat on Maple Street, in one of those small towns where everyone knows everyone else's business. You know the type, where the local paper's biggest headline might be someone's prize-winning tomatoes. The kind of place where serious crime was something that happened in bigger cities, not in their quiet community, where kids still played outside until the streetlights came on. The house itself was classic American craftsman style, built in the 1940s, when they made homes to last. Dark wooden trim framed every window, and the front porch had those sturdy columns that seemed to say, nothing bad could happen here. But the basement was another story. Like many older homes, it had a Michigan basement. Part concrete, part dirt floor, with shadows that seemed to move in the corners no matter how many lights you installed. The previous owners had partially finished it, adding a laundry area and some storage space. But the far corner remained untouched, hidden behind stacked moving boxes and old furniture. Sarah remembers every detail of the day her parents left. It was a Friday in late January, when the winter sun barely seemed to rise before starting to set again. The air had that sharp, clean smell that meant snow was coming. "You sure you'll be okay alone?" her mom asked for probably the 10th time that morning. She stood in the kitchen, writing down emergency numbers on a yellow notepad, even though they were already saved in Sarah's phone. "Mom, I'm 19, Sarah said, trying not to roll her eyes. "I've stayed alone before." Her dad looked up from his coffee. "It's different for a whole weekend, kiddo. Just remember the basement door." "Has a sticky lock, I know," Sarah finished. She'd heard about that lock all winter. "Check it twice, keep the porch light on, don't answer the door for strangers. I've got it." Her mom paused in her writing. "Maybe we should cancel. Your aunt would understand." "Carol," her dad said gently. "She'll be fine. We're only 2 hours away if anything happens." If only they'd known. The first day alone felt like freedom. Sarah ordered pizza, binge-watched shows her mom would have complained about, and enjoyed having the whole house to herself. No one telling her to clean her room or do the dishes. She even danced around the kitchen while making midnight snacks. The house made its usual noises, creaking floors, humming radiators, the occasional thump from the water heater in the basement. Normal sounds she'd grown up with, barely noticing them anymore. Until Saturday night. She was in her bedroom around 11, scrolling through TikTok with her headphones on. The window beside her bed showed fat snowflakes starting to fall, coating the world in white silence. Perfect weather for staying inside, she thought. That's when she heard it. Through her headphones, under the music, a thud from below. Not the usual house-settling sounds. This was different, deliberate, like something heavy being set down carefully. Sarah pulled off her headphones, heart suddenly pounding. The house felt different. That feeling you get when you know you're not alone, even before you have proof. She sat perfectly still, straining to listen. For several long seconds, there was nothing but the soft hiss of the heating vents. Then, footsteps. Slow, measured steps moving across the basement floor. The sound was muffled through the floorboards, but unmistakable. Step, pause, step. Like someone trying to walk quietly but not knowing where the creaky spots were. Sarah's mind raced. She'd checked the doors, hadn't she? The front door, definitely. The back door, too. But the basement door. Had she actually checked it, or just thought about checking it? The footsteps continued their slow pattern. They seemed to be moving methodically, from one side of the basement to the other, searching, learning the layout. With trembling hands, Sarah reached for her phone. She had to call 911, but suddenly her voice felt stuck in her throat. What if they made too much noise coming in? What if whoever was down there heard her talking? The dispatcher answered on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency? Sarah forced herself to whisper. Someone's in my house, in the basement. I can hear them walking. Are you alone in the house? Yes. The word came out as barely a breath. Is there a safe room you can get to? Somewhere with a solid door and a lock? I'm in my bedroom. The door locks. Lock it now. Don't open it for anyone but police. They're on their way. Those next 15 minutes felt like hours. Sarah sat with her back pressed against her bedroom door, phone clutched to her chest, listening to every tiny sound. The footsteps continued their pattern below, but now they seemed to be moving with more purpose. Then they reached the basement stairs. Each step in their old house had its own distinct sound. Sarah knew them all from years of trying to sneak downstairs for midnight snacks. The bottom three were solid. The fourth one up had a sharp creak on the left side. The seventh one moaned like an old man getting up from a chair. One by one, she heard those familiar sounds. Bottom step, second, third. Then, the fourth step's telltale creak. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Whoever it was, they were taking their time, testing each step carefully. Fifth step, sixth. The seventh step's long groan seemed to echo through the silent house. Then the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the footsteps. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. A car drove past outside, its headlights sweeping across her ceiling. She prayed it was the police. Something brushed against the basement door, not opening it, just touching it, like someone running their hand along the wood. Sarah's phone screen lit up with an incoming text. She nearly screamed before realizing it was the 911 dispatcher. Officers are outside, stay quiet. A sharp knock at the front door made her jump. Police, open up! Sarah's legs felt like jelly as she stood. She wanted to run to the door, but what if whoever was in the basement tried to get out while she was unlocking it? What if they were waiting behind the basement door? Red and blue lights now flashed through her windows, painting her walls in alternating colors. More car doors slammed outside. Then came the sound of breaking wood, the police forcing their way in. Heavy boots thundered through the house. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Police, come out with your hands up! Sarah stayed locked in her room until a female officer called up to her. Even then, she opened her door cautiously, half expecting someone to rush up the stairs. But the basement was empty. At first. The officers found the broken window first. Someone had forced it open from outside, leaving muddy footprints on the concrete floor. But what they discovered behind those stacked boxes in the far corner made Sarah's blood run cold. A makeshift living space had been set up. Old moving blankets formed a bed. Empty water bottles and food wrappers were carefully stacked. A phone charger snaked up to an outlet hidden behind a shelf. But it was the notebook that proved most disturbing. Written in neat, careful handwriting were detailed observations about Sarah's family. Dad leaves for work 7:15 a.m., takes lunch. Mom works from home Tuesdays and Thursdays. Girl, S, stays up late. Phone light visible until 1:02 a.m. Window latch loose. Easy access when noise from heating system. The final entry was from that morning. Parents leaving for weekend. S staying alone. Perfect timing. They never caught whoever it was. The police installed better locks, added security lights, sealed the basement window. But the knowledge remained. Someone had been living in their basement, watching them, learning their routines, waiting for the right moment. Sarah's family moved away 3 months later. She says she still checks behind boxes in storage areas, still listens for footsteps that sound too deliberate. Because now she knows, sometimes the danger isn't trying to break in. Sometimes it's already made itself at home. Story 2. The Midnight Knock. Some sounds hit differently at night. A knock on your door at noon is probably just a package delivery or a neighbor. But a knock at 2:47 a.m., that's something else entirely, especially when you live on the 3rd floor of a secured building. Katie chose her apartment specifically because it felt safe. The Mitchell Grove apartments weren't fancy, but they had all the right security features. Keycard entry to the building, cameras in the lobby, a sign-in system for maintenance workers. Even the neighborhood was good, mostly grad students and young professionals. Her apartment was small but cozy, just a 1-bedroom with a kitchen that barely fit one person. The heating never quite worked right, making strange gurgling sounds in the pipes at night. But it was her first place on her own, and she'd made it home. String lights twinkled around her windows. Photos of family and friends covered one wall, and her favorite oversized armchair sat perfectly positioned for both TV watching and people watching through the window. That October night started like any other. Katie was curled up in that armchair, laptop balanced on her knees, some true crime documentary playing quietly on her TV. The irony of that choice wouldn't hit her until much later. Outside, the wind rustled through nearly bare trees, occasionally sending dead leaves skittering across her window. The sound had that hollow quality unique to late autumn, when the world seems to be holding its breath, waiting for winter. Her phone showed 2:47 a.m. when the first knock came. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks. Not the gentle tapping of a neighbor locked out or the rapid knocking of someone in a hurry. These were slow, purposeful knocks that seemed to echo through her small apartment. Katie froze, her hand halfway to her coffee mug. In the 6 months she'd lived here, no one had ever knocked on her door this late. The building's security meant no random visitors, no door-to-door salespeople, no lost pizza delivery drivers. After 9 p.m., you needed a key card just to get into the lobby. She muted her TV, barely breathing. The hallway outside was supposed to be empty at this hour. The only sounds should be the occasional creaks of the building settling and the distant hum of the heating system. Instead, 3 more knocks came, louder this time. The door shuddered slightly in its frame with each impact. "Package delivery!" a man's voice called out. The voice was rough, like sandpaper on wood, with an edge to it that made Katie's skin crawl. Her mind raced. Package delivery? At nearly 3 a.m.? She set her laptop aside and crept to the door, careful to avoid the creaky floorboard near her entryway. Through the peephole, she could make out a figure in what appeared to be a brown delivery uniform. But something felt wrong. The uniform looked wrinkled, hanging too loose on the man's frame, like it wasn't made for him. The lighting in the hallway cast strange shadows across his face, making it hard to see his features clearly. "I know you're home," he said, his voice dropping lower, taking on an almost sing-song quality. "I can see your TV light under the door." Katie's stomach lurched. She glanced back. Sure enough, blue light from her TV flickered under the door. Such a stupid mistake. She should have turned it off completely. Then something else hit her, something that made her blood run cold. She hadn't heard the building's main door buzz, no elevator sounds, no footsteps coming up 3 flights of stairs. In a building this old, you could always hear people coming up the stairs. The steps echoed in the stairwell. So how had he gotten up here? The knocking turned to pounding now, each impact making the door rattle in its frame. "Open up!" he shouted, dropping all pretense of politeness. "I just need a signature." Katie backed away from the door, her phone already in her hand dialing 911. Her hands shook so badly she had to try twice to hit the right numbers. Just as the dispatcher answered, she heard other doors opening, her neighbors coming to investigate the noise. "Hey, what's going on out here?" Mr. Chen from 3B called out. Katie had never been so grateful for her elderly neighbor's insomnia. The pounding stopped instantly. Quick footsteps headed toward the stairwell, followed by the heavy door slamming shut. The sound of those retreating footsteps echoed in the stairwell, each step faster than the last, like a hurried drumbeat fading into distance. Katie stood frozen, phone pressed to her ear, as the dispatcher asked if she was still there. "Yes," she managed to whisper. "He's running down the stairs." Mr. Chen's weathered face appeared in her peephole, his gray hair disheveled from sleep. "Katie, you okay in there? I heard shouting." She couldn't bring herself to open the door yet, even for her neighbor. "I'm okay, Mr. Chen. Police are coming." Other neighbors were emerging now, their doors creaking open one by one. Mrs. Sullivan from across the hall, still in her floral robe. The college students from 3A, looking more awake than anyone should at 3 a.m. 10 minutes later, red and blue lights painted the brick walls outside. Katie watched from her window as 2 police cars pulled up, their headlights cutting through the autumn fog that had settled over the parking lot. The officers found the building's back emergency exit propped open. Someone had wedged a piece of cardboard into the lock to prevent it from closing completely. In the stairwell, they discovered a discarded brown jacket that looked like a delivery uniform. The fabric tag had been cut out, leaving no way to trace where it came from. And there, right outside Katie's door, was a package. Just a plain brown box, sealed with cheap packing tape. When the officers carefully opened it, they found it stuffed with newspaper. Nothing else. But that wasn't the end of the story. A week later, 2 detectives visited Katie's apartment. They weren't there to ask more questions. They were there to show her something. "We caught him trying the same thing at the Riverside Apartments," the female detective said, spreading photos across Katie's kitchen table. "He got in the same way, propped open an emergency exit during the day when the building was busy, came back at night." The photos showed a man in his 40s, ordinary looking except for his eyes. They had a coldness to them that made Katie's chest tighten. In his car, they'd found 3 more delivery uniforms, a collection of packaging materials, and a notebook. The notebook was what the detectives really wanted her to see. It contained addresses, dozens of them, all for apartment buildings in the area. Next to each address were notes about security systems, delivery hours, and most chillingly, specific apartment numbers. "He was watching the buildings," the detective explained, "learning patterns. He knew which residents stayed up late, which ones lived alone. He'd wait until he saw a TV light under someone's door, then try his delivery routine." Katie's address was in that notebook. Next to it was a note. 3C, female, alone, up late, watching TV, no visitors, good target. He'd been watching her building, watching her, learning her habits. They found more in his car: rope, duct tape, zip ties, basic tools that could be explained away if he was caught, but told a darker story when combined with his notebook full of women's addresses. "You got lucky," the detective said. "Your neighbors coming out scared him off. 2 other women in different buildings weren't so fortunate." The detective didn't elaborate, but she didn't need to. The look in her eyes said enough. Katie moved out the next week. She couldn't stay there, knowing how close she'd come to being more than just an address in his notebook. She found a new place, a first-floor apartment in a busy building with 24-hour security. "Down here, I can run if I need to," she explains, "and I can see who's coming before they get to my door." These days, she doesn't accept deliveries after dark. Not even from uniformed carriers she recognizes. If something arrives late, it can wait until morning. "The scariest part," she says, "wasn't the knocking. It wasn't even finding out what he had planned. It was realizing how long he'd been watching me, learning my routines. All those nights I sat by my window, thinking I was watching the world outside. Someone was watching me back." Next time you're home alone and hear a strange noise, maybe it is just the house settling. Maybe that shadow in the corner is just your imagination. Maybe that cold spot is just a draft. Or maybe you're not as alone as you think. If these real stories kept you up at night, hit subscribe for more terrifying tales every day. Just remember, not all security systems can protect you from what's already inside. Sleep tight, if you dare.